Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. This is the day we do Mythbusters. The co-host is Chris Rossini, who is also the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Welcome to the program today, Chris.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Paul.
And I imagine you have a few points to make about those many, many myths that are out there, and people misunderstand so many things as a result of our educational system. So what do you have?
Yes, we'll start with the democratic socialists, that new term that cropped up this year in the election. And it's basically socialism with a different wrapper. I went to the Democratic Socialists of America website and read through it. And yeah, like I said, different wrapper. They try to separate themselves from all the socialist atrocities of the past. They try to say that, no, we're different, but it's really just the same. So we'll start with some of their myths. And right from their website, it says, democratic socialists believe that both the economy and society should be run democratically to meet public needs, not to make profits for a few. So Dr. Paul, please start with debunking. You know, there's a bunch in there that you can go after. Go ahead.
And the first thing that comes to my mind is the theme of many of my speeches, if not all of them, was making the point that the point of liberty has been divided for over 100 years. There's economic liberty and personal liberty, and one side, the liberals tend to be a little bit better on social liberty, and conservatives better on economic liberty. And I want them to bring them together and make sure that liberty applies to economic activity and social activity. But here, what they're describing under democratic socialism is both of them should be run by the government, and they admit it up front. So it's almost, you can say what they're talking about is explicitly the opposite of libertarianism and nonviolence, not the use of force. So this is obviously a facade when they talk about it, and it sounds pretty good. Oh, democracy, that's good. And little socialism, they've been taught in schools, that's good. That means you care about the poor and that you will help them. But I find the two terms, in many ways philosophically distasteful. We accept as libertarians the idea that if we have to do it, if we have some government to bring about and decide on who the leader should be, the democratic process, a vote would be adequate. But the whole thing is when you use democracy to determine economic policy, it becomes the dictatorship of the majority. So it's exactly the opposite of protecting the minority. So here we have democratic socialists who pretend that their goal is to take care of the average person, the poor person, against the very wealthy and the rich and the Wall Street people. At the same time, they're endorsing the use of force. And unfortunately, they see themselves as being capable of using government force to narrowly take care of a certain group of people. What they don't realize is you can't control government force once you endorse the principle of force. So if you endorse the principle of welfare redistribution, spending and borrowing to help a certain group, that's whoever gets control of the purse strings, whoever gets control of the government, then gets to make all these decisions. And guess what? The welfare state actually helps the wealthy more than the poor people, but it's based on the same principle. And the best example of that, of course, was the bailouts. There were a lot of people suffering in the last severe recession, depression, and the wealthy got bailed out, and they were the ones who were ripping us off and speculating and using credit and committing fraud, but yet they got bailed out. But the homeowners, many of them lost their jobs and still haven't gotten their jobs back, and they lost their houses. So this whole idea that you think you can control power if you deliver to the politicians, what you can't control are the politicians, and yet they always have this dream that if we have good people, this will happen. But of course, the big question then under this system, what if they make mistakes, which they will because they're politicians, there will be power struggles, and nobody knows what people want and how to run a society and economy. When they make a mistake, when the government makes a mistake, it's very, very painful to everybody. In a free enterprise system which would compete with this, of course, the mistakes are limited to that individual who's taking a risk and will benefit if he does the right thing, but gets a penalty if he does not. But socialism, in one way, is a term that's carelessly used. In the purest sense, Sanders might say, well, I'm not a true socialist because I'm not advocating the total ownership of every business. But he advocates the total control through regulations and taxation. So there's a big stretch. Sometimes I make the statement, and truly believe it, that the government doesn't own my house and they don't own my property, but I have to pay rent, my taxes. I pay huge amounts of money just to stay there. And if I want to dig a hole in the ground, I have to deal with the federal government and regulators. So there's a fuzzy line there when you lose ownership. And in many ways, we have lost ownership. And of course, the answer to all the problems today that we have, we find it would be in the free markets and voluntarism and free trade and protecting the consumer. You know, it's interesting that those who believe in socialism had a recent referendum in Switzerland, and they say we're going to guarantee a benefit for everybody, and it wasn't a small amount. And we thought, well, it's getting so bad. But fortunately, the Swiss, even though they've leaked a bit from their free markets and their gold standard, they said that it didn't make any sense to them. 77% of the Swiss people voted it down, which is pretty good. I'm afraid if they had that vote in this country, we might not even do as well as that. But sometimes people like what socialism does and the redistribution of wealth, in the United States, they tend to shy away from it. So I'm a little bit surprised and disappointed that democratic socialism has received a significant number of supporters during this last campaign, but it's up to us to try to expose it for what it really is.
Yes, and we'll stay on this topic for the next one. And I do recall reading that they're like, well, we do have to deal with the fact that corporations will be with us and we can't get rid of them. And it's like, all right, thanks a lot. And so they say, but the government could use regulations and tax incentives to encourage companies to act in public interest and outlaw destructive activities such as exporting jobs to low-wage countries and polluting our environment. Now, I guess they don't think of why companies run to other countries, and it's not just low wages. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Paul, but isn't the U.S. government itself the single largest polluter on Earth?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that because we have the biggest military, and that's where so much of the pollution comes from. And we've done some atrocious things with the military and other governments too. They have generally been very much involved in the pollution. But when it comes to the misbehavior of corporations, and you argue a libertarian free market on those principles, people say, oh yeah, you just don't want to regulate them. They just run roughshod over you and they're going to destroy all this. And that's why you have to have regulations. The Federal Reserve, they know when they create credit, they cause problems to come up. But they are good regulators. They'll know what to do, regulate credit. And this, of course, they did that during the housing bubble. They had excessive credit. So they say, we'll regulate and make sure it's distributed fairly. So we will have Community Reinvestment Act and force them to make bad loans. And one problem just moves into the next problem. One mistake creates two new problems, then you have more regulations. So they really believe that if you have the right people, they know that it's just not working, but it's just because they're not in charge of writing the regulations, and that's what they want to do. They believe that they can manage it by regulations if people, and blame everything on free markets. Therefore, they have to regulate the markets, and then they'll do that by taxation and protective tariffs or whatever is necessary, because they truly believe they're good managers. And yet, I think that people realize that it's mismanagement that they create. The people who have experienced this are not happy, but they continue to fight for this socialism and this power to control other people. But we have to remember everything they advocate, whether it's taxations or regulation, redistribution of wealth, is all based on force, arbitrary force, by taken from one and given to the other. So they never have any qualms about using guns. They never have any moral concerns about taking from one who honestly earned their money and giving it to somebody else. And so they don't see it in moral terms, and they don't see it in practical terms, and they're not willing to admit what it really is. They're never willing to admit the failure of a system. They always want just more and more of it, and of course it always fails. But they want to blame the market, blame freedom for it. And then this other thing, well, it would be unregulated if we had totally free market. No, that's not true, because there are rules. We have rules that would restrain the government as well as bad actors, because today there's no restraint on government, and that is the problem. The governments can do anything they want, but in a free market system, you're not allowed to commit fraud. And you're not allowed to lie. You have to live up to your contracts. You can't counterfeit money, and you can't walk away from your obligations. And people think, oh, this is it just won't work. We need regulators. But no, you need people to follow the laws of non-aggression. And there would be, it would be well understood. If you look at the Enron scandal and what happened there, there was a lot of fraud committed there, but the challenge to that was a state law, and the people who were guilty were tried in a state court. It didn't take the federal government to bring that system down, and many people, innocent people, got punished, unfortunately, because of this. But the others who were committing this were, punished as well. But most people think that it means that the corporation can do anything they want. On pollution, in a free society, you're not allowed to pollute. I mean, that's an act of aggression. And yet government and big business have worked in collusion over the many, many years, especially in the Industrial Revolution. There was always this permission that the corporations could pollute. And right now they even talk about these carbon taxes and sharing of it. And yes, you can do it if you buy this permit. So I think a pure property rights, free markets, voluntary association, no fraud and no counterfeiting would be a lot better than the system that we have today.
Yes, the free market is the strictest, harshest regulator out there, and that's why it's so hated by business and government, because the free market plays no favorites, whereas politicians obviously do. Dr. Paul, we're always discussing how it's literally impossible for a single individual or a group of individuals to centrally plan an economy. There's just an infinite number of variables involved in every single second of the day. It's foolish to think that a group that sits in stone walls can sit and plan the economy or the world as they try to do. I mean, right now we have an oil glut coupled with a weak economy, yet oil prices are rising, gold prices are rising. So the quote-unquote economists that everybody listens to these days are always caught off guard. So please discuss this issue, please.
Well, I think it's interesting that gold and silver have risen significantly, from where oil bottomed out. It actually has doubled down a little bit right now, but it's a tremendous increase. But there is a cycle, even in the free market. If there's a higher demand, the supply has to come in order to knock the price down and make it more competitive, and the company that's most competitive will produce the product and make the profit. But this whole idea that if gold prices are going up, that's set aside. That's bad, because that's money they don't want to talk about it. But if oil prices are going up, they get real excited. They say oil prices are going up because that means the economy is recovering, which may or may not be true. But it may be going up because of another factor. Everybody looks at the supply and demand of gold, the supply and demand of oil. But there's a supply and demand of the unit of the currency, and that is the dollar. So if the dollar is going down in value, so these prices do have to go up, and there has to be a lot of adjustment. This fallacy is, that planners are smarter than the market can be, and yet that is based on the fact that a few people in the politicians in government, as well as the bureaucrats, are smart enough to know what millions and millions of people want to do, and that's why socialism always fails, because they can't know. And also it invites corruption, and it invites special interests to control those decisions. But the market is, Adam Smith described it as the invisible hand. There's a lot of activity out there that nobody could sort out. Even with our modern day computers, you can't say, well, with our computers, we're going to figure it out, and we will be able to tell the bureaucrats what to make and what the price would be. It's impossible. You have to let it all be sorted out and let prices determine this. And unfortunately, though, people don't have enough confidence or understanding of how the marketplace works. Because, in spite of all the rigging that goes on, even in our markets and the interest rates and everything else, ultimately, the whole system is overwhelmed by these personal choices, because if there's too much government control, say on wage and price controls or whatever, there's an underground economy. There's always the requirement that we know what the true value is. So even in countries where they have rigged exchange rates between two currencies, there's always another market. When I was in the Air Force, even in the 60s, we'd go into these various countries and you'd have the official exchange rate, but you also had another exchange rate which was done on the street, and a taxi cab driver. And that goes on all the time. So the marketplace of the supply and demand, and the demands of the people, what they want, is the only way that you can sort it out. And this whole notion that somehow or another a bureaucrat knows what the price is, it goes back to this thing we talk about so much, and that is the price of money, the interest rate, which is one of the most important prices that we can look at, because when the market is to be operating smoothly and we get the proper information and tell us how much people are saving and what the demands are, instead of depending on somebody who thinks they know everything. So nobody saves, and the government and the Federal Reserve just creates the money and sets the interest rates. Well, it's doomed to fail, and we're in the throes of it failing. And that system is so precarious right now that we have zero interest rates or negative interest rates on the function that should tell the businessman, well, is this a good time to go and build and have more capital investments because interest rates are down? Or should we hold back because interest rates are too high? Well, interest rates are real low, but there are no savings, so it's bad information. And of course, this is why the money is out there, it's unlimited, and guess what they do? They take the money and they have mergers and they have buybacks, and the stock prices go up. And the executives, the Wall Street people that are on the receiving end of this, and rightfully so in this case, because their salaries go up when their stock values go up. So the very people who are advocating all this spending and deficits and all, and that they have to have more to help the poor people, are literally feeding all this money that never gets into the pockets of poor people, and the middle class gets wiped out. And that is the conclusion of Austrian economics, that we are seeing the wiping out of the middle class and also the class struggle that's going on. And that's dramatized so clearly, with what we see in the congressional records, the fighting and the bickering for who gets to manage this monstrosity that we have.
Yes, finally, Dr. Paul, let's talk about the seen and the unseen. And this was laid out beautifully in the great Henry Hazlitt's work, Economics in One Lesson. And we recommend that everybody read that book. It's very easy to read. He always stressed in the book to focus on the unseen, not just what you can see. So that'll lead into our final topic. And you were on Fox Business the other day, and there was someone who admired Keynesianism. He was trying to explain to you that it's really great when government spends money because it creates all these jobs. And what was he missing, Dr. Paul?
Well, he was missing the fact that he hadn't read Hazlitt's book or the law, because Hazlitt makes the point so clearly. There's the seen and what is not seen. So if the government comes in and spends $1 billion on public housing, which breaks down after 10 years or something and is ruined. But you see is this magnificent thing. You see the housing project and the poor people have housing. Isn't this all wonderful? But the unseen was, what would have happened to that $1 billion if it had been left in the economy? Of course, it might have gone into a new industry where people would have had jobs and people would have made their own decisions. But it's even worse when you see tens of billions or more being spent in the military-industrial complex buying weapons that just get blown up and sold on the market, where the military-industrial complex makes huge war profits and profits on these weapons. And that takes it out. So the people don't have this money. And they said, well, we don't need to worry about that because we don't depend on that. We depend on just the Federal Reserve printing the money. Just once again, introducing the notion of distortion of the monetary unit and causing the malinvestment and causing all the problems that we have. But they never ask, instead of what? What could have happened if you didn't take the money out of the marketplace in the first place? And yet people say, well, the government should spend it. This is the whole thing about, democratic socialism or any type of welfarism and Keynesianism and average Republicans and Democrats, because they're not trying to show that the military-industrial complex and welfare is based on the same principle of taking money away from people and using force and driving it into the pockets of the very wealthy, and then they wonder what's going on. But they never ask, instead of what? Well, the market will ask that question, and right now, instead of seeing a prosperous middle class, what we're seeing is a very impoverished middle class that's getting poorer all the time and more dissent with the people. So someday, I hope they wake up and they're introduced to Austrian economics, not only Henry Hazlitt, but the many others who will explain this, explain economic policy. You know, when I had a bit of an economics course in college, it was totally boring and uninteresting. When I discovered Austrian economics, I said, oh, finally there are some smart people who know what to talk about, and I became fascinated with it because it does answer these questions, but it's an exciting, it's an exciting philosophy to read and study and find the answers and the reasons why we have so many economic problems. Then it's much easier to reject this notion of, socialism okay if it's democratic, and then you can have the dictatorship of the majority, then the special interests can become the dictators. So there's so much to be learned by sound economic policy, and I invite you to take a look at these various books that are easily found on the internet. And Chris, I want to thank you today for being with us on this program of Mythbusters.
Always a pleasure, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank the audience for being with us today with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and please come back soon.